What's going on, guys? Zedd here, bringing you a very exciting Marvel Midnight Suns video. This is going to be if you haven't seen it already, my reveal of the balance patch that I worked on with Louise. And I'm just basically going to do a patch rundown. I'm going to go a little more in depth through each card than what I already have on here. And if you haven't seen this before, link to it will be in the description with the full patch notes. And then you can see here the Nexus mod link. That'll link you to this page here, Nexus mods, if you're not familiar with it. Essentially, it's where you download mods. Go figure. And the way you would download it is very simple. You would just navigate to your Marvel Midnight Suns local files within Steam, right? And then you would go to a section called packs, and this is explained a little bit down here under installation if you need. And then you would just click and drag after downloading it. Where? Oh, here. Duh, the button right here. So this is the page. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to. I posted the patch on Steam and Reddit. I tweeted it. It's on the Discord pinned in the game mods section if you want to check it out there. And again, it'll also be in the link or in the description below as well. So this is what the page would look like. So Zedd, me, and Louise Moratelli, gentleman who has been spending a lot of time trying to mod the gameplay of Midnight Suns, he essentially reached out to me and said, I like your opinion on the game. I think you'd be able to make a more fun version of the game while keeping the integrity of the game alive. And I said, yeah, for sure. Let's do it. It's something I was trying to do for a while, right? If you guys have seen my videos, I have the worst cards lists. I have the Is Midnight Suns Too Easy? And so he asked me, I had a great time, and so I started thinking about it. I started compiling this list, and so far, this only came out today. We had it ready to go for the weekend. So far, all the feedback has been very good. If anything, some people are saying some things are slightly too strong. I may disagree or agree with that. And then, it's the internet, so some people go, oh, you're only nerfing these two cards and buffing everything else? Typical. Anyway, intro out of the way. I'm going to give you my breakdown of the patch as the curator of the patch and talk about why I made the decisions I made. Obviously, it's biased, but the goal is to make every character feel awesome. So let's just go right through it and let's discuss. And if you want to follow along, you're welcome to do so, obviously. So, disclaimer, let it be known, I think there needs to be more changes to the game at a design level in order to get it to where I think it should be. This shouldn't be surprising, right? I talked about in the Is Midnight Suns Too Easy video. There's a lot of things in the game that I would like to see changed, but I mean, that's more like a wish list, and it's not really things that are going to happen. So, Louise and I, to the best of our abilities, we're going to try to push the game in a way that makes everyone happy. Makes everyone happy. We are going to be working on future content as well. So kind of skipping a little bit in the disclaimer here, it says, in the future, Louise and I are looking at creating a real ultimate difficulty in order to compensate for some of the power creep that is inevitable. So essentially, we're going to be revamping the passives a little bit, the ones that need it. We're going to continually buff and nerf the cards as needed until I'm happy that all 10 cards feel useful in some way and not overwhelming or underwhelming. And then in terms of passives, obviously some of them need to be changed, such as like Ghost Riders needs to be redone, and then Captain Marvel's needs a bit of work. So that's coming down the pipeline. This was just strictly focusing on cards, and we're also continuing this through all of Season 1 at least. So with Venom, Storm, and Morbius, they're all going to be included in these patches. I'm going to do my best to make better versions of those characters as I see fit. So that's the disclaimer. So the first change is in overall gameplay. So all legendary cards are now available from any epic level acquisition, i.e. epic coils, hero quests, hero ops, etc. Note they are still considered legendary for deck building in order to restrict multiple copies or invalidate legendary blueprints. So what that means is the deck building aspects of legendary cards are no different at all, but the acquisition is much, much easier. What this does is it makes rolling mods for legendary cards feel better. It doesn't feel so gambly. It also makes New Game Plus feel a bit better, so you don't necessarily have to research the armory and then go through all the challenges every time. And with how many times I've played the game, I know I personally hated doing that, so this change is welcomed. And to give you some insight, the reason why this change came about in the first place was because when I had nerfed Iron Man's Hellfire Beam, which we'll get to, it it made his mission impossible, as well as upping the heroism cost on precision. So we had to somehow. Luis said, oh, this isn't going to be possible. Can we just make them epic instead? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And so thinking about that more, not only did it help the Iron Man challenge, but it also just made it better for rolling mods, right? So hopefully, everyone can agree that this just feels nicer. I think the whole blueprint idea is a little bit unnecessary. I think a lot of people would also agree that crafting items and modding legendaries just feels awful. So I can at least tackle one half of the issue. So that's one change that is for every character, no matter what. So enjoy legendary card acquisition. Alright, so Hunter actually didn't have a lot changed. So Hunter is an amazing character and should rightfully be one of the best in the game, as they are. However, there's some cards that are just dreadful, and, well, obviously I want every card to be useful in some way. Now, I want to add a stipulation that there are still Hunter cards that do need some work. However, some of them I just don't quite have my head wrapped around how they should be changed yet, and we'll get to the watch list and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But for now, this is what we get. So Mindbreaker Plus, remove the increased heroism cost. This is something that everyone was talking about right from release, and myself included. When I was exploring the Mind cards, Mindbreaker Base, I was like, yeah, this is a little pricey, but cool. And then Mindbreaker Plus, I was like, why does this cost 4 heroism? And I think everyone feels that way. So, and yes, I'm lumping everybody into that opinion. So this is just reduced to 3. No one likes this at 4, so let's just make it 3. This was a no-brainer for me. Summon Charlie Base and upgraded. They got the same changes, so I'll just cover them both. We have changed the card type from Heroic to Skill. Now this is huge. The effect is exactly the same. The original effects are the same. It still has Exhaust, but by turning it into a skill and generating heroism, so long as it's not free, this might get people to actually use it and summon Charlie, because if you have Charlie friendship levels, you'll still get the upgraded versions of the cards. Like Howl is an amazing card, right? It's an AoE mark. What's it called? I don't remember the name of it now, but there's one that applies vulnerability, so that could be useful as well. So if for someone who wants to explore the Summon Charlie card, I think this will feel amazing. The card is still RNG at the end of the day, and I think it's expensive as a card play, but particularly if you roll free on it, I think this will feel way better and actually worth running in the deck as well. Especially since it takes up the legendary spot, this card needs to be worth it, and it just wasn't in the base game, so we just made it a skill. All of this is a lot of words to say, made it a skill card. And it works exactly how you would expect it to work, but just as a skill. Next up, Deadly Ground, same thing, base and upgraded. This is a card that I have ragged on so hard. I think Deadly Ground is awful. I think people who make it work are doing it to have fun, but I think you're just shooting yourself in the foot. So we have kept it a skill. We kept the damage numbers. I haven't changed any of that, but I did remove the heroism generator and instead made it free base. So if you happen to roll free, that's just like there's nothing we can really do about that right now. So lucky but unlucky. And I hope that this makes you maybe consider it more. I know that I really enjoyed it in the testing. I love Deadly Ground thematically, but it sucks costing a card play. It feels awful if they spawn in bad spots. So for me, having this card be free was a no-brainer. It's worth considering now. It's fun. It's great if you're like a big Spider-Man player or you're a big Magik user with the knockbacks, right? So Deadly Ground should feel really, really nice to actually consider in your decks now. Now these were the key cards that stuck out to me with Hunter that needed changes. Like I said, there are some that need to be toned down a little bit, Last Sight being the main one, and there are some that still need to come up, such as, Charge needs a bit of work. I had some ideas for that one, but they didn't really pan out. But trust me, I am watching the really awful cards other than these ones and looking to tone down the best ones as well. Not much to say there. I think most people would be happy with those. Blade. So this is a big one. So let's talk a bit about Blade, because I know already I've had this conversation in the Discord and I'm kind of getting two opinions on it. So let's discuss. So my goal with Blade is to give him a little bit more of an identity, especially with the Deadpool release. Now, as you guys may or may not know, as per my last tier list video, I think Deadpool in the base build is a disastrous character. I think he's awful. I think he's a horrible design. Even with the best mods you can get on him and the best deck you can build on him, he just finally feels okay, which is dreadful. So to separate him from Blade a little bit, I decided to take Blade in a little more of a debuff and bleed direction. So with the introduction of the vampire storyline via the DLC, right, we can probably assume that throughout all 4 characters released with the Season Pass, that it's going to continue the storyline. There is a, I'll avoid spoilers, there is a character revealed at the end of the Deadpool DLC, another villain who... It looks like we're kind of working up to that fight, right? So, all that to say, the new Deadpool DLC missions, or I should say, sorry, the new DLC missions, on top of Revenants, on top of Bleed being great against Fallen Reinforcements, I wanted to take Blade in a direction that was making him more of a Bleed bot and less of a Reaper bot, because if you've played Blade throughout the game and into endgame, you know that the only way to make him any good in the end game, other than Revenant control, is to just make him stack bleed on one target, Reaper, explode, gain strengthen, finish him off with quick strike or something like that, right? Something in that vein. And it just doesn't feel good. You're not really using bleed for bleed. You're using bleed for Reaper, and that's fine. It's effective, kinda. But it doesn't feel good. And a lot of Blade builds on Ultimate 3 at least are identical. You run something in the realm of like 2 Reapers and then like 2 quick strikes because his other attacks are garbage. And then you would run something like 2 Make 'em Bleeds, Hunger, and then like 2 Daywalkers or 1 Daywalker and a Glaive. And that, give or take 1 card, is the typical Blade build, because there's no other way to build them. As it stands, you have to run 1 or 2 copies of Make 'em Bleed. I personally run 1 because I hate the idea that I have to run 2, and so I run Glaive for that reason. But a lot of people don't even run Glaive, and because they feel compelled to run Make 'em Bleed. I totally agree with that, and I just don't like it, but I agree with their decision. So my plan is to make Blade a little bit more of a debuff boy, kind of like Wolverine, right? You can build Wolverine that way. And so that's the idea. And so by giving him access to bleed on some base cards other than Make 'em Bleed and Glaive, it'll just open up more choices as well as mod choices, because I know some people, they went for Strike Plus or Daywalker, and they would try to get Apply Bleed as a mod on those cards in order to not use Make 'em Bleed, right? And so I'm just sort of giving you that outlet by default, saying, hey, here's some access to bleed without Make 'em Bleed. You can cut it to 1, or you could try cutting it to 0. And so there's still more work that needs to be done with Blade. For example, I think Daywalker may need to be buffed a little bit now. I think that I actually think that Stake might need Apply 2 Bleed. That wasn't something that came up today, but I've been thinking about it a lot. I think that might be necessary, especially since it's heroism. But for now, here's what we did. So Relentless base, we just increased the effect damage modifier, and not much to say there. Relentless base is still a pretty ho-hum card, but if you get it in the early game in a new game, it should feel a lot better to actually consider. And if you've ever done the book club missions, you'll know that you get a free Relentless Plus very, very early in the game. And so the Relentless Plus upgrade, 150 to 200, this is amazing. Keep in mind that percentage increases like this are pretty significant when you're discussing things like vulnerability and strengthen, right? So even though on this card I'm going 150 to 200, if you apply strengthen to this, all of a sudden that's like significantly higher than what it was before, right? And of course, Reaper gives you strengthen on KO, and so what I encourage you to do, and what I want you to try, is if you still think Relentless is a useless card, I just want to pitch you the idea of try using Reaper to get strengthen, and then use Relentless and activate its effect on another target. And just, I promise, Relentless isn't that bad. And then you mod it with a really solid mod. It might be worth considering. Now, not for everybody. You might roll your eyes at that statement. But again, the idea here is to open up build paths. Relentless feels okay. Strike Plus. Strike Plus added Apply 1 Bleed as an additional effect. This is the one that kind of got people up in arms a little bit. It's quite a strong change. Some people were saying that they think Strike Plus is too strong with Apply 1 Bleed, and honestly, I disagree. And the reason why Strike Plus's damage output is a joke, and giving it the flexibility. So if you roll like apply 1 weak or apply 1 vuln, apply marked, if you roll one of those nice debuffs, all of a sudden Strike Plus becomes this really high value debuff card that you can use on the same target if you want, or you could always just use it, to sort of spread bleed, spread debuffs, and then activate the hunger, which is marked, right? So I'm giving you some flexibility there, and what I'm trying to encourage here is not just running 2 Reaper, 2 Quick Strike, and that's it. I want someone to feel empowered to run even just 1 copy of Strike Plus or 1 copy of Relentless Plus. This is my goal, right? I want every card to feel good. So I think that these changes are pushing Blade in that direction where you have to think about his attack cards at least a little bit. Savage Plus, this probably still isn't enough. The card is very niche, but this pushes it in the direction that it's designed to be used for. Now, for those who maybe don't know what Savage actually does, because you've never used it before or you forget how long it's been since you've looked at it, it is a heroism costing card, 2 heroism, and what it does is it does extra damage similar to Relentless, but it only works against targets with block. Now, there's 2 issues with that. Well, 3. Number 1, there's only like 2 or 3 units in the game with block. I'm just ballparking. Number 2, once the block is gone, so for example, once you destroy the shield guard's shield, or you break the guardian out of his shield by CCing him, all of a sudden Savage doesn't do the same amount of damage it does. So it is quite literally just to bust through shields. And so if you think about it that way, it actually loses a lot of value all the time. And so I wanted to make it maybe slightly more enticing with the apply 1 vulnerability, because then you can sort of open up and go, okay, I'm going to use Savage Plus on this shield guard, and we're just going to rip right through it, right? We're just going to go boom, tons of damage, apply vulnerability, follow up with other characters, and just destroy him, right? So maybe not enough, but it at least leans into the niche a bit more. That was the whole point. Not much else to say there. The stake base, we decreased the heroism cost, so now it's just 2 on base and upgrade. Not much to say there, other than I think it's really expensive. Stake Plus, I took off the damage a hair, because, well, I don't think Stake is OP by any means, but I just wanted to make it a bit fairer in terms of card design. So I shaved off just a little itty bitty bit of damage, and I added 1 bleed. So now you have bleed as an option on Strike Plus and Stake Plus. And so now hopefully people can maybe explore some other bleed options or blade build options. He is still a strong character. You can still run the build that I described at the beginning, and you won't feel like nothing in here is nerfing the current builds, right? That's worth mentioning. So, try some stuff out, see what you think, and he might still need more work in the future. We'll have to see. All right, Captain America. So Cap is in a really, really good spot. I didn't really do much. There were just 2 things that stuck out to me. And the first being that his block generation was just ridiculous on certain cards. And then some of his attacks and I should say his damaging skills were just awful. So Shield Bash, I think, is a great example of this. So I just touched it just a hair because I don't want to overtune the best defense and its applicability. It's already an amazing card, right? If you're running Cap in the end game and you don't have 2 best defenses, you're frankly doing it wrong, in my opinion. And so I wanted to keep that best defense because it's so integral to his builds. You can't really nerf it other than making it like 80% of the damage or 50% of the damage, but I didn't really like that idea, so I left the best defense, and instead I just wanted to bring his other means of generating block down a little bit, and then increase some of the damage on his more trash cards, such as, again, Shield Bash. So Shield Bash is doing a little more damage. Now, 10%, you might go like, oh, what? Like 10% is nothing. Keep in mind that Shield Bash is based off of how much block you're consuming. So if you're generating a ton of block, then with like best defense, then Shield Bash is going to do a lot. So I just wanted to give the Shield Bash a bit of love, because it just doesn't really see any use. So yeah, Spang, same thing, right? Spang, some people use it in the early game, but once you get to the end game stages and later game, it just doesn't do enough, right? It's just a damage source, and on KO, I think it is, you draw cards. Cap already has plenty of card draw. He does not need that on Spang, or rather, it's not enough to run the card. But similarly to Shield Bash and the best defense synergy, I just don't want to overdo it with Spang, so I increase the base damage and the effect damage, giving you a net 20% increase if you're using Spang's full effect. So hopefully, if you're a Spang user, you'll like this, and if you're not a Spang user, maybe you'll consider it. Now, Dig In is the big one. Both the base and the upgraded have received the same change. On base game, Dig In decreases, or gives you block based on your health, and it's half your health. So that's why it's such an overwhelming number. I've always felt like Dig In is a very brain dead card. Now, what I mean by that is it's the kind of card where you use it and you're just like, oh, okay, done. You know, wash my hands clean. I don't have to worry about anything. And I just find that to be quite dumb in a strategic tactics game. Now, I do like defensive playstyles. I like counter, resist, all that kind of stuff. But when it's too free and too easy to stay alive, that just takes the skill expression out of the character and makes him very one-trick and very boring. So all those words, what are you trying to say, Zedd? Well, what I'm saying is I nerfed it. So I decreased the amount of block he gains by from half his health down to about 35%, exactly 35%, which is a net 15% reduction. Now, 15% is not a massive number, but keep in mind that when you're discussing like Ultimate 3 difficulty, or just if you're trying to climb difficulties and you're going into, you know, Act 2, Act 3 endgame, and enemies are doing more damage and your health is going up, like it's eventually you're going to start to notice the difference a little bit. And now Dig In upgraded, right? It's still good. It still gives you counter, so it's still a great card, but it's just not the, you know, oh yeah, I'm just always running this card until I get, like, I want you to think about it a little more. And to touch on that, Tactician. Tactician is a card you would just completely cut out of the deck for Dig In. There was never a reason to run Tactician over Dig In. Dig In was just such a more valuable card. Now, Tactician, in terms of the amount of block given, it's either 30 or 35%. I can't remember now off the top of my head. But so it always gave such an insignificant amount of block compared to Dig In. So I wanted to bring Dig In and Tactician a little closer together. And now the decision you need to make is, do I run Dig In, which gives me like counter and it takes taunt, or it takes aggro off my team, right? Or do I run Tactician, which is card draw and gives my team block? So this is the decision now. And when I was testing this, I actually felt like, okay, both these cards now feel equally as good for different reasons entirely. Maybe if you have like counter best defense, or the counter mod on your best defense, maybe now you might consider running Tactician. Or, you know, likewise, if you don't really love best defense, or you run one copy and you're just always a 2 dig in kind of guy, maybe you'll consider running one Tactician. And so I just gave Tactician a little bit of love by increasing the amount of block given to allies by a simple 5%. Nothing super wild, but enough to compensate a little bit. So, not much to say here. Cap's in a really good spot. I just felt like Dig In was so brain dead. Again, the best defense is one of his best cards, if not his best card, but I don't think it's overpowered. And because of how many players and playstyles now derive themselves off of the best defense, I felt it kind of ridiculous to nerf it personally. Because Cap isn't OP, he's just easy to use. So, yeah. I like these changes. I'm happy with them. I hope you're happy with them too. Captain Marvel, this is the other really big one, alongside Blade thus far in the list. So, Carol has had a rough run of things since release. I don't think anyone would really disagree with this if you've actually really tried to make her work into the later difficulties. As it really stands, like let's just cut to the chase. Binary takes too much work to get, and it's not rewarding enough, and it's too easy to lose, right? So all of the issues stem from Binary. I actually argue that point. I say it's not that Binary is the problem, it's that her cards are just way too hello. Like, her cards sort of suffer from the Deadpool issue, or maybe you could say Deadpool suffers from the Captain Marvel issue, where the devs designed her in a way that they're like, okay, we're going to balance the cards assuming that she always has Binary. It's like, well, if you do that, then it's like, well, how, like, you know, it's not good, right? So I did buff Binary a little bit, and I also tweaked some of her less used cards or some of the cards that just felt dreadful. There is a little bit more work that needs to be done. For example, Supernova might need a little bit of love. Regroup probably needs a buff, but I wasn't sure. I'm going to wait and see on that one. So let's talk about it, shall we? Go binary card. This is the card you get once you use 3 Captain Marvel abilities. Increase block gain modifier, 50% health, 75% health. So again, like Captain America, if you notice, when you use Go Binary, the amount of block you gain is half your health. Now, if you play her on higher difficulties, you'll notice, or you'll know, that she can take maybe 3 hits, 4 if there's a minion in there, and then it's gone. Like, that's it. 4 max, like max, 4 hits before it's just gone. And it sucks. You basically get 1 turn of binary, if we're being honest. So I know by upping it to 75%, and I did some little math. I haven't tested if 75 was enough. I might even do 100% health, to be frank with you. But 75, when I was doing the math on paper, I was looking at, okay, offensive stat to health to how much damage enemies do at this difficulty at this stage in the game. It looked to me as though 75 health on average was going to give her about 1.7 more hits. Now, what do you mean 1.7? Well, I basically took the average damage of an average mission and concluded that some missions it was 1 hit and most missions it was 2, so it equated to about 1.7. I won't get into it too much, but essentially she can take 2 more hits. Plus, I did give her access to another source of resist, so all of that together, she should feel a little bit better in terms of her sustainability, but she's going to feel a lot better in terms of her damage output, because what I did to binary was I increased the offensive modifier by 25%. Now, if you don't know, when you go binary, it increases your damage by 100%. So it's strengthened, but it's a better strengthened, essentially. And so by increasing that by 25%, it's inherently buffing all her other cards by that amount as well, which is why you won't really see that many damage changes on the list. Actually, you only see 1. It's because I still want her to feel a little bit meh out of binary. I want binary to still be a little bit of work to get, but then once you get it, like, I still want to live out the go binary fantasy with Captain Marvel, and so I leaned into that a little more rather than making her base design too much better, right? So that's that. Cosmic Ray. This is the one that was the most insane. This is the one that testers of the patch were going like, okay, this is like ridiculous in a good way. Because Cosmic Ray Plus changed additional effect to read on KO, gain 1 counter. This right here is what it currently is. And instead I've added 1 resist. Now, what's the point here? Well, the goal is to make it so that she doesn't have to solely rely on Bring It On and Knee Strike for sustain, because like I said with Regroup, no one's really running it. But I could see someone maybe going for more of a tank Marvel build now, just for fun, with Cosmic Ray, Knee Strike, Regroup, Bring It On, and so on and so forth. I could see it, right? So the resist here should feel great. And because it's on KO, I was happy to leave both counter, which is an amazing buff, and resist. So that's why it has both. So this card is incredibly good. I hope you consider it now, whereas before it wasn't really all that great. Quick Jab. Quick Jab base and plus, they both got a 10% increase. Not much to say here other than I wanted Quick Jab to feel just a little bit stronger, because when I use Quick Jab, it just feels awful. It's just like yep, this is a get binary faster tool. But once you're in binary, it's kind of like, this is a super underwhelming quick. So just a little touch, just a nudge, just to give it a little more oomph in what it does. Now, Quick Jab, I'll admit, if this still doesn't put Captain Marvel over the edge, I'm going to take the taunt off of Quick Jab. So, spoilers. But we'll see. That may not be necessary. Photon Beam, base and plus. I hate this card so much, and so this was the first thing I did. Reduce heroism cost. I think the AoE aspect of it is fine, the line damage is fine, the taunt is fine, everything is fine, and in binary, the damage is it feels good. Like, it feels nice, but what doesn't feel good is spending 3 heroism, at least for me. So I reduced it to 2. Photon Beam still might not be used, but I hope people at least consider it now. If not, then I will have to make some smaller changes to it, but not much to say here other than 3 just felt ridiculous. 2 sounds perfect to me, so there it is. And Rain of Blows, this is the other big one. Now, it's still consuming almost all of your block, but not all, meaning you could now run this at 1 copy and not feel like, you know, oh, I have to just redraw until I can finally use it, right? And the other way Rain of Blows would work on base game is by getting a kill with it and then having on KO gain block, but I don't like that the card feels restricted in that way. So Luis was able to bump it down from 100% block to 95. Now, I am willing to lower this number, you know, maybe like 80, 75, but I want to keep the base design of the card. I want to keep its integrity, and you'll notice that as we go through, there's very few cards that have changed in very significant ways. So I hope you consider Rain of Blows as well. This overall just takes a lot of Captain Marvel's awful cards and just makes them feel a little bit better. Yes, you still have to work a bit for binary. Yes, you can still lose it if you take too much heat, but I think that's the whole point. So I hope that this feels better, and I hope you enjoy her playstyle a little bit more. Alright, Doctor Strange. This is the other big one. So, Vapors of Altor is broken. Like, let's be honest, if you disagree with that statement, I think you're just... Respectfully, I think you're wrong. If you don't think Vapors of Altor is broken, I respectfully disagree and think you're wrong. But, so I have nerfed it. I've completely redone it, reworked it. So, Vapors of Altor, removed conceal effect, change base effect to read, apply 1 resist to strange or an ally. Now, before you jump at me and go, whoa, hey, that's awful, keep in mind that the upgraded Vapors is still healing, right? And it's a pretty significant heal, might I add, so you don't have to run heal on your Hunter, or you don't have to run heal on your Nico, right? So there is still that function of it. But also, resist is something you can use preemptively, right? It's something that it's like, oh, I have the turn to use this, now I can use it, I can top up this unit, and they're getting resist. It's sort of like, maybe think about it as a heal card that applies resist, if that maybe gives you some perspective. Also, I wanted to do this change rather than apply 2 resist, because even right now it kind of feels like a Shields of Seraphim, but better. If I made it 2 resist, then we would be gutting Shields of Seraphim more than it already is. So, plus 2 resist, if you rolled free on this card, it would just be ridiculous. So for now, 1 resist and the heal is good enough for me. I want people to maybe get used to not having the conceal, because point and click conceal is just fucking broken. So that should knock, you know, Doctor Strange down a little bit, while still keeping like all his utility, right? And his hand manipulation, Agamotto's Gaze is still super strong, and Winds of Watum is still ridiculous, and all the other Strange cards, right? Astral Meditation if you're an item user, etc. Now, the other change we made is Blessing of the Vishanti, base and upgraded, same thing. Increase heroism generated 2 to 3. So this is going to be one of 2 cards in the game that gives 3 heroism base. And I did this because I know some people use Vishanti, but they really only use the card if it's free. It's like, well, yeah, if a card is free, of course you're going to use it. So by increasing the heroism generator from 2 to 3, I want it to feel slightly better and slightly, you know, worth considering going for those Vishanti builds, right, with chain characters or Nico or Wolverine. And, you know, I specifically had Nico and Wolverine in mind, and that's why giving that extra heroism on top of Doctor Strange's passive is going to push you towards that Midnight Special synergy, that Crack the Sky synergy, that Witch Storm synergy, etc. So if you're not using Blessing of the Vishanti, I don't think this change is necessarily going to make you jump at the card and be like, oh, I need to completely rework how I build the decks. However, the Vapors of Altor change may make people cut that card and look at other Strange options, so that's why I wanted Vishanti to basically be, hi, remember me, I'm still a card, when you start cutting Vapors from your decks. So Strange is a really strong character, so, you know, this Vapors nerf is not going to gut the character by any means. It's just going to take the crutches away from a lot of players. Sorry, I said it. You know it, I know it, and everybody knows it. So, yeah, not much to say here. He's still a great character. Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider saw quite a few changes, actually, and he has more to come down the pipeline when Louise and I tackle passives. So let's get that right out of the way. I will be changing how his passive works. We will be addressing Drain Soul and its clunkiness eventually, but not yet. So, as it stands, I said this in my tier list video, realistically, there's one real way to play Ghost Rider, and I will die on this hill in the base game, and that is 2 copies of Lash, right? Two copies of Lash, 2 copies of Straight to Hell, 1 Hellmouth, 2 Hellride, 1 Penance Stare. That's your deck. And realistically, you can maybe take out 1 Straight to Hell or 1 Hellride if you're weird like that. But at the end of the day, half his cards feel awful, half his cards are amazing, and I don't like that. So I tweaked majority of his garbage cards, if not all, and I hope that you consider them. For example, Retribution Plus is an amazing card now. It has the discard effect of Whip, and I've talked about how good I think Whip is because of its discard many times. So this is very akin to Whip. Removed regular knockback and added forceful knockback. So Retribution base is still regular knockback, but the upgrade is forceful. This card feels awesome. The animation is great, and it's great. Yeah, this card feels awesome. I hope that people consider running it alongside 2 Lashes. I don't think you'd want to cut a Lash for Retribution necessarily, unless you were really trying to conserve health as Ghost Rider, but I'm hoping that this could be like the 3rd attack that you take, right? That's the hope. Judgment base and plus. Judgment has a lot going on with its card, but all this is doing, just to kind of paraphrase it for you, what's happening here, we're increasing the damage essentially by a pretty significant number, by about like 50%. So that's all that's happening here. Judgment, a little bit tricky, a little bit hard to use on base, but upgraded, it's a lot easier to use. It's a small AoE that base hits allies, but it doesn't when you upgrade it. This card, it's not that it's bad, it's that by consuming health, I never felt like it did enough damage to be worth the health consumption. So this change kind of makes it feel a little bit more worth it. And then if you use Hellmouth, right, to get strengthened and then use Judgment, oh, now you're talking, right? Hell Fury. So this card is... The trouble with it on the base game, it's not that it's bad, it's that Hell Ride just gets rid of it. And Hell's Fury does not maintain its stacks when it leaves the hand. And so I wanted to make it a little more desirable, but because it's a stacking card, right, akin to Hellfire Beam, you have to be careful with how much you buff a card like this, because otherwise you could run into Ghost Rider turns where he's just one-shotting bosses without using Penance Stare. And my fear was that you could get to a point where Hell's Fury was just a better Penance Stare, and so to prevent this potential future from happening, I went with just 15% for now, because it's 15% per stack, or more per stack, so now 65 per stack. And again, because Hellmouth exists and it gives you strengthened, these are the things you have to keep in mind when you're looking at the way that Midnight Sun's damage works, right? So keep that in mind. If you're like, oh, it's only 10%, oh, it's only 15%. Like, well, you need to think about strengthened and vulnerability. Okay, so anyway, Immolate. Immolate is an awful card. This might not even be enough, but so the base card does the same amount of damage as the upgrade now, but the difference is that the upgrade is free. And actually, let me just change this to the correct terminology. There we go. And so by doing this, I'm hoping, like, Immolate probably still isn't a great card, but keep in mind that it is a means of taking self-damage for Hell's Fury. So I'm hoping that by buffing Hell's Fury and by making Immolate free, that you maybe, and Retribution being much better, you maybe consider a bit of like a self-destruct build, right? Or like something that's not just lash people in a line, Hellmouth for strengthen, and ride them down, right? Like that's all Ghost Rider is now, and then heal up with Straight to Hell. I want to nerf that build slightly, as you'll see, but I want to buff the other like soul stacking and Immolate playstyle that nobody uses. Like let's be honest, nobody runs that version of Ghost Rider, at least on the higher difficulties. So, because taking the self-harm, the reward isn't enough, right? That's the reason. So I'm hoping that the Hell's Fury and the Immolate changes get you at least thinking about it. I thought they felt pretty good, but granted, I didn't fully try Judgment. I've used the base card of Judgment, and I've always felt like it just didn't do enough damage, so I'll let you decide for yourself. And lastly, Straight to Hell Plus. The base version of the card does not have healing. Keep that in mind. Straight to Hell Plus. Right now, it's healing for 33% health. I just gave it just a little love tap. 8% down to 25. Not only do I like round numbers, but rounded as in 0 or 5. But I've always felt like Straight to Hell was just a little bit too free as a heal. This nerf, in conjunction with all the other buffs, and then the future passive change, I'm hoping that players maybe consider running one copy of Drain Soul in their decks. But I know you probably won't right now, but the next patch for Ghost Rider, hopefully you consider it, okay? So that's all this is. Just a little love tap, like, hey, this card's already ridiculous. It generates heroism, it's a skill card, it's a tanking skill, it's conceal. Stop it. Why does it need to heal for a third of my health? All right, next up, Hulk. Hulk is a character who most people would say was kind of a like overpowered character when he was released, and then people were saying he wasn't that good, and now people are saying he's just world breaker then die, and I don't really like any of those answers. So I'm taking him in a direction that kind of lives out the Hulk fantasy. So when I was talking to a buddy of mine when the game was like when we were seeing the characters for the first time, the gameplay showcases right on the YouTube channel. When I told him that Hulk was the last character, he was like, "Oh, sick! Does he just throw people around? Like that would be so awesome." And when we saw him, he doesn't throw people around at all. I was like, "That's super weird." Like you'd think that he just yeets people, especially with how popularized the first Avengers film scene is, where he just yeets Loki around the screen, right? So anyway, you know, not to just be thematic, but also I think Hulk needed some buffs to some of these cards, because yeah, he is a bit of a world breaker bot right now, and that's not fun. So the Gamma Kick change is huge, as is the Mighty Blow change. I mean, all these changes are kind of huge, let's be honest. So let's go through them, and I'll talk about why I did them. So Gamma Kick base. Gamma Kick is a very disastrous card base because I've always felt like, you know, why does it have forceful knockback and no base damage coefficient? Because when you're getting rage with Hulk, it feels awful to use any of his attack cards that aren't smash. And so Gamma Kick was not considered because it was forceful knockback, which is nice, but it had no base damage coefficient because it was like, well, it doesn't really benefit from the rage. It's not really all that good. It consumes a rage for just one knockback. Like, what's the point? So Louise was able to add gain 1 rage. This does not consume rage. So now this is the exact same effect as what's on Smash. And so now you have Smash, which is your point and click stun, but now you have a point and click knockback, which is like insanely good, right? So Gamma Kick base is pretty good, but what's even better is Gamma Kick Plus. Now I will admit it got a small nerf in that Gamma Kick Plus used to have weaken. But I took that off of Gamma Kick Plus because I thought that would make the card way too overtuned, and it would have. So we added the same gain rage, does not consume rage effect, so it's always good. And I added a base damage modifier. Now again, keep in mind, this is Hulk we're talking about. So when you're getting rage stacks and you're increasing your offense, and maybe you get strengthened from, say, Nico or somebody, by giving him a 25% base damage modifier on a forceful knockback, which does 100% of your offense, it's like, oh, okay, now the numbers start getting ridiculous. Trust me. Gamma Kick Plus is insane. It feels awesome. It's worth running, I promise. And so if you guys have seen my worst cards video and my decks video, I said at one point, man, I can't even think of 8 cards that I would want to run on Hulk, and so that's why I run Always Angry. Now, with this Gamma Kick, I'm just going to cut Always Angry. Now, to touch on Always Angry, it is a card that I do want to change. I'm just not sure how yet. So I will change it. I know it feels awful, right, for a lot of players. So I am thinking about it. I promise. So Gamma Kick Plus is great. Please consider it. It feels awesome. It feels good. And just Spartan kicking people across the screen is just absolutely amazing. So please try Gamma Kick Plus. I promise. Now, in response to that, I gave Mighty Blow the apply weak effect, and I gave it 2 turns. Now, why would I give it 2 turns, and why just this? Like, what? Mighty Blow costs you 3 heroism. Why would you not just run Gamma Kick over Mighty Blow? It's like, well, that's a great question. So Right now, Hulk doesn't really have any utility other than stun on Smash and stun on Thunderclap, right? That's it. And then, because again, no one was running Gamma Kick, because why would you? So what I want to do here is I want to bring Mighty Blow kind of in the conversation. Some people ran it, but not many from what, at least the builds that I saw. I didn't personally run it, although I liked the card, but I didn't run it. So Mighty Blow base, if you don't know, it has the highest forceful knockback damage coefficient in the game. I mean, Hulk just has that anyway, but it is absurd. It does absurd amounts of damage. It's not even funny. But it's only to one target, right? Or two with a forceful knockback. So a lot of people thought that that wasn't really worth it at 3 heroism, and it's like, oh, well, Hulk has so many other heroics that you have to consider anyway. Yes, that's true. So why would you run Mighty Blow? Well, you wouldn't. Okay, great. So I wanted to give it 2 week because I want Mighty Blow to be mighty. Because right now, you punch someone and it's like, oh yeah, it's a lot of damage, but that's it. But now when you punch someone, like, boom, and you've just yeeted them so hard out of existence that they're just like, oh my god, what? And they're just weakened for 2 full turns. So it makes that heroism feel worth it. It makes consuming that 1 rage feel worth it, and it gives him just that little bit of utility. So you can just like punch a fallen reinforcement, be like, boom, you're not a threat to me anymore. And so again, Mighty Blow felt great with the weekend. It felt way more worth running in the deck. I really love these 2 changes. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, but I really hope that if you're a Hulk fan or if you're like, bro, this character is just World Breaker and Int, now he's not. You can make him a knockback machine akin to Magik in that way. So, and lastly, on that knockback trend, and this is very similar to Photon Beam, I have always felt like Thunderclap is way, way, way too expensive, and frankly, way, way, way too linear and thin for the heroism cost, right? At least Photon Beam is a little bit thicker, but then you look at cards like Photon Beam and Hellride, and you're like, okay, Hellride is 3 cost and way wider than Photon Beam and does more damage. You look at Photon Beam, it's 3 cost, it taunts everybody. You look at Thunderclap, it's 4, it does no damage. Yes, it stuns. You're gonna hit, what, maybe 2 units plus a minion, right? I'm just throwing out a random estimation, but... And you have to use your move to get him in the right position, which means you're not going to have your shove, and like all these things, right? I've always felt like Thunderclap is just way too expensive. So I shaved it by 1. And I increased the damage just a hair, right? Again, I like round numbers, but also I just felt like reducing the heroism wasn't that much because the base damage on Thunderclap Plus is not that relevant as it's a regular knockback, not a forceful knockback. So this should make Thunderclap feel a little bit nicer to use, a lot less clunky on new games where you don't have him upgraded, because Thunderclap as a common card unupgraded is like, ugh, really dreadful. So yeah, this should bring him a little more in line. This should make him, if you want to build just like a knockback Hulk build, go for it. Now, all of his knockbacks feel amazing, right? World Breaker, Thunderclap, Mighty Blow, Gamma Kick, Shove, right? Oops. So, yeah. Yeah, these are thematic changes, but, I mean, Hulk was in a pretty good spot before, but... You know, like I've said before on a few characters, I don't like cards that just feel dreadful, and a lot of his cards just felt dreadful. So hopefully these make you a little more excited to play Hulk. Iron Man. So Iron Man is only 2 changes, and you know, base and upgrades got the same thing. There's really not much to say here, but I feel like I need to maybe elaborate on why I made the changes. So the first change is precision, increase heroism cost from 2 to 3. Hellfire, decrease base damage modifier from 100% to 50%. Let me elaborate on what this is, what this means, and why I did it. So, as you guys know, Iron Man is sort of a do-everything character with a little bit of work and a little bit of support and some redraws. He can literally 1v9, and that's great. He's designed that way. He was marketed that way. He just is that kind of guy, right? I'm going to do everything myself. I hate being wrong, right? It makes sense, right? However, if you build Iron Man in mind right from the get-go on a new game, or even when you're into endgame, if you start getting best in slot mods and you're using items and all that, people are doing 1-turn kills with Iron Man like they're going out of style. It's not even hard, and you don't even need items to really do it once you have the best Iron Man builds, which is just sad. And if not 1-turn kills, then 2-turn kills, and that shouldn't really be the norm, at least in my opinion. And so when I was looking at people's Iron Man builds and their one turn kill clips, all right, or YouTube clips or Twitch streams, it was always like the culprit was 2 cards, and that being you would use Quick Blast in order to get the cards right, draw a hero card, and then you'd use Leave It to Me to gain the redraws and draw cards, and then you would use Precision with the redraws you got, and then Hellfire Beam with the redraws you got, and some people were getting, I don't know how this works really, like, but people were getting dozens and dozens and dozens of redraws in 1 turn, which is just like ridiculous. But people who were getting that many redraws weren't necessarily finishing in 1 turn, they were finishing in 2. Now, lastly, when it comes to context, I have always felt like Iron Man is slightly held back by the fact that he is a little bit clunky, right? A little bit bricky, right? If you draw a bad hand with Iron Man, it's like, ugh, it feels really bad, right? And you can't really get rid of his cards if he gets like dazed with, you know, crossbones, or if he gets, I don't know, like confused with Wanda, right? And these are things that are frankly out of your control in many ways. So it just felt really bad when he gets CC'd, and so this is kind of what keeps him slightly in check. Otherwise, he'd be ridiculous. Also, with the addition of the Deadpool DLC and the food truck research, there's more consistency to the character, as you can simply discard one of his clunky cards if he is CC'd or he goes down or whatever, right? So, here's what I'm hoping with the character. I'm hoping that by giving Precision 1 more heroism cost, you either need to spend 1 more redraw to get it how it used to be, or concede that you need to spend 1 more heroism. I'm cool with you to make the decision. And by nerfing Hellfire Beam's base damage, that's worth mentioning, not the redraw damage. So the redraws are still exactly what they were before, which is 50% offense per redraw. But the base damage is going down. Now, what does this mean? Well, what have I been talking about this whole time? It means that the strengthened Iron Man Hellfire Beams will be weaker, pretty significantly. But it also means that the unstrengthened Hellfire Beams only require simply 1 extra redraw to be exactly what they were base, okay? So to word that again, in case I lost you, Hellfire Beam with no items and no strengthened takes 1 more redraw to be as good as it is on the unmodded game. Okay? Precision takes 1 more redraw to be as good as it is on the base game. Okay? So I'm just adding a little bit, I'm putting a little bit more of a time pressure, or a little bit more of a resource investment into these 1-turn kills, into this Precision Hellfire Beam synergy. And because I want people to still do the infinite stacking, like Hellfire Beam, redraw, you know, Precision, Hellfire Beam, redraw, Precision, Hellfire Beam. Like, I want people to still have that style. I want it to still feel worth it, and it will feel worth it. I just don't want it to be so easy and so accessible and so brain dead. So I just wanted to make the entry to these plays, the startup of these plays, a bit weaker. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I hope you can see kind of where I'm coming from. This does not affect his power level whatsoever. He's still an incredible character. It just makes him have a little bit more ramp up time, if you will. Okay. Magik. Magik is a character who is very, very strong. She's super fun to play too. Like, very tactical, pretty fun. Very synergetic with her team and the environment, and she's great, right? But she's a little ridiculous. Let's be honest. She's a little ridiculous. But what's interesting is people who, you know, who are like very good at the game, they will recognize the same thing that I recognize, and that being, there is no way that you don't run 2 kicks, and there is no way that you don't run 1 quick soul slash or 2 quick soul slashes. Meaning, if you're running 3 attacks, it's going to be 2 kicks, 1 quick soul QSS, and if you're running 4 attacks, it's going to be 2 kick, 2 QSS. There is no other way to play the character. I'm sorry. Like, if you're running Trapdoor on the base game, why? If you're running Soul Blast on the base game, why? You're just doing it wrong. This is like the Ghost Rider syndrome, and yes, you know, if you're offended by that, well, I'm sorry, but it's kind of true. And if you haven't tried 2 kicks, 1 QSS, or 2 kicks and 2 QSS on the base game, you should. Or you should also just install this mod and play this version of Magik, because this one feels a lot better. So, The problem with Magik is that her attack cards are so like, I'm always going to use these two because these two are just awful. But the rest of her cards are actually good. Like, she's a pretty well designed character, and all of her cards are used in some way. They're quite useful. I mean, there's reinforcement, but like that's not even a card, and I've turned it into a card very similarly to Summon Charlie. So you can experiment with that a little bit. So let's talk about it, right? So what makes Magik so strong is essentially Limbo's Grasp, right? This is very akin to the Captain America, the best defense. I don't want to nerf the best defense. I don't want to nerf Limbo's Grasp. I don't want to nerf these cards if I don't have to, because they're very much the essence of the character. They're what we've all grown to love and get used to and play as, and it's fun, right? The best defense is fun to use. Limbo's Grasp is fun to use, and it summons a portal too. So, like, I don't want to nerf these cards because they're enjoyable. So instead, I want to nerf the playstyles around them ever so slightly. So, Kick Plus. Kick Base does 100% base damage modifier, like the unupgraded. Upgraded, it did 150. Now I'm nerfing that by 25%. This is to bring it just down a peg, because right now when you Limbo's Grasp into Kick, it's just like, it's overwhelming. Like, it's ridiculous. So I just wanted to nudge it down a hair to make that single Limbo's Grasp play into Kick be a little less strong, but it's still a great card, don't get me wrong. Now Soul Blast, this one's a bit weird. So Soul Blast Plus added base damage modifier 0 to 25%. Now again, because it's a forceful knockback, you have to be careful with the percentages and what you do. 25% on a forceful knockback is actually a big number. Then factor in Limbo's Grasp, and it's an even bigger number. Now, what's the deal? Well, wouldn't you still just run 2 kicks in Limbo's Grasp? Yeah, maybe. But now instead of running QSS, you might consider running 2 kicks, 1 Soul Blast, 1 QSS, or 1 kick, 1 Soul Blast, 1 QSS. Why? Because kick is only a knockback, which means they go half the distance of forceful knockback. So if you punch them through a portal, right, or I should say kick them through a portal, they only go that tiny distance, right? But Soul Blast will send them twice as far. And so if you're a player who loves the knockbacks, I know I do. I'm a big knockback fan. And you like that sort of manipulation aspect of the character, Soul Blast is going to feel a lot better, because right now you use it in the early game and you get rid of it as soon as you can, as soon as you get kick, honestly. And that just sucks. So it might need to be like 30% or 50%, but for now I'm just going to go with 25, and I'm hoping that kick and Soul Blast, they're both good in their own way. Kick is still a little bit more damage, but not so unbearably better than Soul Blast, and Soul Blast is more knockback distance. Will kick outscale with Soul Blast with Limbo's Grasp? Yes, but it's going to take 2 or 3 uses of Limbo's Grasp to really start seeing that culminate on itself. So I'm hoping this makes players consider Soul Blast a little more. I know when I was testing this particular change, I still personally enjoyed Kick at 2 copies, but I did run 1 Soul Blast and 1 QSS, and that felt nice. So I hope maybe you consider it as well. Now, Trapdoor, I also really enjoyed this card too, and I'm not sure, and this is just like a personal thing, I'm not sure if Trapdoor is really my flavor, if it's really my style, but I overtuned the damage it dealt by a very significant margin, because right now, or on the base game, right, Kick and Trapdoor do the exact same damage, which is a dreadful decision. Why? Because Kick interacts with Relay, your passive, and Limbo's Grasp, but Trapdoor does not interact with either. So I needed to, if I was going to nerf Kick, I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the damage off of Kick and I'm just going to slap it on Trapdoor. Because then Trapdoor becomes an insane card. Like, look at this. Trapdoor plus increased base damage modifier to 175. That's insane. That's like heroic card levels of damage on an attack card that also has the utility of completely repositioning an enemy. So while it doesn't interact with Limbo's Grasp, if you're the kind of player, I don't know, maybe you just don't really love the portals. Maybe you don't love Limbo's Grasp. Maybe you feel like, oh my god, I hate that this character literally revolves around Limbo's Grasp. Instead, maybe consider like Trapdoor, Reinforcement, Banish, Gather, right? make her more like utility, more supporty, because Gather with a debuff on it is quite a good card. Reinforcement now is a playable card. Banish is amazing. Darkchild is amazing, right? So you can maybe go in not the portal direction, and I'm hoping that maybe this change to Trapdoor is enough. Now, if it's not, honestly, either I'm going to give it a debuff or I'm going to up the damage even more. We'll see. We'll see. But it feels solid, like it feels decent. Now, it's not just a write it off kind of character, or card, excuse me. And reinforcement, exact same changes as Charlie. Not much to say here other than it is no longer a heroic, it is now a skill. So it's going from costing you 4 heroism to giving you 2. So it's a net +6 heroism change. Also, this means it will be contesting with Limbo's Grasp and Limbo's Portal. Yes, that is true, but realistically, you really only run 2 portal cards in a deck anyway. Maybe 3 if you have a good mod on it. But you know, like if you have 2 free Limbo's Grasp, then you could consider running 3. But reinforcement, it is still RNG, it is still wonky, it's still tricky to use, but it doesn't feel like you're missing out on anything. And if you rolled free on it, there you go. It's a free 4th unit to use for 2 turns. It's fun. Now, it's not broken by any means. It's still RNG, like I said, but if you like the idea of summons, if you like the idea of reinforcement, I really hope this encourages you to maybe explore it, and I hope you enjoy the card. We are almost at the end here, guys. Nico, admittedly, Nico did not get a whole lot. She's like super flashy, she's super fun, but her damage is very, very low, and this is actually by design. Her offensive coefficient, if you ever noticed, it's one of the lowest in the game, if not the lowest. I forget now off the top of my head. But what she does do well is buffing her team, generating heroism, and Crack the Sky. Crack the Sky is her damaging card, let's be honest. I'm pretty sure we can all agree there. And that's great. Crack the Sky is an amazing card. It feels awesome. Yes, it's RNG. That's what makes it balanced. The animation is sick. It's amazing. If you don't like Crack the Sky, I think you just have a stick up your butt, because Crack the Sky is such a beautiful card and it's so much fun to use. But I don't want that to be her only option. Now, realistically, are the changes to Blood for Blood and Witchfire going to make me personally run them? No, but that's a playstyle thing. So what did I do? Well, Blood for Blood base and upgrade. Increase base damage modifier from 150 to 160. Now this is a pretty low number, but I'll tell you why. It's because she has Blood Magic, which can give Strengthened, I wanted to be very careful about overtuning this card's damage. Also, I know that a lot of players will run a copy or 2 of Blood for Blood modded with Quick. And so I was hesitant to make a Quick card have an insane amount of base damage on top of a heal, right? Already Blood for Blood with Quick is quite powerful. So a little bit of a love tap, nothing crazy. Again, because her offensive coefficient is quite low, I'm allowed to kind of get away with leaving her with 160% damage modified Quick, and not have her break the game. So for those who do use Blood for Blood Quick, here you go, you're welcome. I hope it feels a little bit better for you. And for those who don't use Blood for Blood, maybe this will help you consider it. Again, I don't personally, because I use her as more of a debuffer and a support, but that does not mean that Blood for Blood and Witchfire versions and like a DPS Nico is out of the question. And I wanted to give DPS Nico players a little bit more to play with, right? And so Witchfire, again, not much to say here. This is the one, just to clarify, Witchfire is the one that you use it and it just targets random enemies and continues casting on KO, whereas Witchstorm is the heroic that is targetable. So Witchfire base, it does a ton of damage base. It's 200%, but I wanted to elevate it even more. Why? Because it's RNG. I find setting up Witchfire to be just awful. It's a nightmare to use. It's so annoying when it doesn't work. I don't even run it anymore. But here was my intention. Because it's 225 damage modifier, I want this card to be like, okay, I'm going to mod Witchfire. Let's just say to apply bleed, right? Doesn't matter. Let's just say you mod it. I want you to cast Witchfire and be like, you know what? If it hits the healthy target, I'm doing 225% base damage and I'm debuffing the target. That's amazing value. If I hit a minion, I'm recasting on somebody else. So I'm hoping that this change makes it so that Witchfire basically is a win-win situation. I don't want it to ever feel like you're missing out or like it's oh man, you know, at least not that often. Because right now in the base game, Witchfire is like, oh god, oh shit, oh, you know. So I hope that again, 25% is pretty significant, especially with the only character who just gives strengthened out for free all the time. I hope that for you DPS Nico players, I hope you like this. And the last one, this goes for all Nico players, and this includes me on this one, is the double up change. Now, one thing I've talked about with a lot of other skilled Midnight Suns players is we've all agreed that double up plus would be better with exhaust. And this is like unanimous. This is not even a discussion. Why? Well, because double up base has exhaust. When you use double up, like, oh, I got skills, I don't want that redraw. Oh, I got attacks, I don't want that redraw. Oh, I got attacks, redraw. Oh, mission's over. It's like, well, shit. At least now, if it has exhaust, you know, oh, I don't want attacks, redraw. Oh, heroics, perfect, that's what I wanted. Use it. Done. Instead of it being like, oh my god, double up. Again, by adding exhaust, it's just gone. It's dusted. So once you use it, we're thinning out the deck. We're adding more consistency to the deck now by reducing your 24 cards down to 23, or if you have hero combos, your 26 cards down to 25. And this is a good thing, I promise. Adding exhaust to double up is a buff. I promise you. And in conjunction with that, because I didn't feel like that was enough, I made this the other card to base generate 3 heroism in the game, because I want double up to feel really worth it. You're like, yeah, I'm doubling up. Pardon me, I'm doubling up my heroics. Well, here's an extra heroism to use said heroics. So double up now will not feel as bricky. Yes, it's still RNG. Yes, it's still going to have the bad turns, but when you use it now, it'll be like, oh, that felt way better. Right, so this change hopefully is welcomed. I know that this version of double up feels way better to me, and now I actually do run it in my decks, whereas I didn't before. Now, I will admit, last thing, it is a little tricky to consider running double up in Nico because her skill cards are quite good, right? If you run like, you know, let's say you run 2 copies of Blood Magic and 1 Restore and like Empower, right? Oh, well, that's my 4 skill cards. So there is still a decision to be made here. Like maybe you cut Restore and run double up, or maybe you cut 1 Blood Magic and you run double up, right? So I think it's kind of cool, right? If you're like a theme player, right? Nico Minoru with the Staff of 1, and you just run single copies of all her cards, you can now run a 4 skill version of the deck, excuse me. Right? 1 Blood Magic, 1 Restore, 1 Empower, 1 Double Up, and you're gonna feel pretty good about doing that. So yeah, that's double up. All right, Scarlet Witch. This one is so already I can tell you that I took the route that people didn't really expect, or if I asked people how would you change Wanda, I went the direction that people did not say. And I want to explain why that is briefly. So Wanda, as it stands, she's in a bit of an identity crisis, right? She can manipulate enemies by CCing them or having them attack each other. She can knock people around with Quick Toss, which is such a godlike card. And she's got her debuffs and all that. And then on top of that, she's a support, right? Chaos Field, you have Hexmark, you have... I'm going to consider Hex Charge a bit of a supporty card as well, right? All these things. But the issue is she's not really good. She's not really great at anything, and that's what holds her back. Now, a lot of people have attributed this to a lack of moves. Now, I want to elaborate on this briefly. So, when people are talking about adding moves to Scarlet Witch, they're implying, oh, it'll be easier to target Hex Field. Oh, it'll be easier to get in range for Chaos Field. Oh, it'll be easier to use No More. Okay, true, but there's a few ramifications there. There's a few issues with adding moves to a character, and I want to explain why I didn't do this, at least right now. If you add moves to a base character's design, you are inherently buffing every other character on the team. You are also buffing the fact that we now have the Deadpool food truck that gives you a second shove. You are now buffing the cure on move, right? If you use that research. And so there's all these things, right? You can use a move to set up Hellride. You can use a move to set up Thunderclap. It's too much. It kind of impacts it takes away from the positional like skill of the game, if you will. And that's actually something, like, I'm a big Scarlet Witch fan. It's something that I actually enjoyed about the character. I know that's a bit of a masochist take, but I enjoyed the fact that it was hard to make her stuff work because, like, oh, I want to be over here, I want to be over there, and then she pairs really well with Magik because if you run Limbo's Portal, it's like, oh, you gain a move on redraw, so it's like, you know. So I personally enjoyed that design in the game. She's designed that way. She's intended to be a bit more technical, so I didn't want to, at least again, right now, I didn't want to get rid of that. However, to make up for that and to benefit those who do want to use those AoEs, I decided to lean into the Queen of AoEs direction. That being buffing the living crap out of Hexfield and Unleashed. Well, more Unleashed, but Hexfield too. So, let's start with Hexbolt. So Hexbolt is a card that it has a cap of 5 chain, which is awful, or at least the base version of Hexbolt is awful at chain 5, but it also takes forever to even get there, right? So admittedly, Hexbolt may need more love, but by upping the damage to 75, and Hexbolt Plus starting at chain 2, it feels pretty good. When I looked at the Drain Soul damage, Drain Soul was 50%, and I feel like Drain Soul is decent. It's not that bad. So I'm like, well, why does Hexbolt feel so much worse? Well, it's because Drain Soul counteracts the negatives of Ghost Rider, that which is it heals him, right? Hexbolt does not have a reason to be as weak as it is. It kind of just is. And so I was like, yeah, well, if you mod a debuff on it, such as weak or bleed, I want it to feel a little better than that. So I looked at the damage of Strike. I looked at the damage of Chain Strike. I looked at the damage of whatever I just said, Drain Soul. And I was like, okay, let's go 75%. Now, admittedly, this still might need more love, but I'm hoping that you at least consider it now. If you lean more into that supportive debuffy side of Scarlet Witch, Hexbolt now is like, oh, I got, you know, apply Mark on Hexbolt. Like, I don't know. And you're like, 2 copies of Hexmark, 2 copies of Hexbolt, and it does decent damage. So now you're just like, Mark. Like, I don't want Hexbolt to be just a straight DPS card. I don't think it's really best used in that way, but I want it to be like, I want it to be an option, right? Like 2 chains on one, another chain on another. So I hope you get what I'm saying. I think this is enough, but maybe not. Hexfield, when you mod it with a debuff as well, it feels okay. It's just hard to use because you have to use Unleash to buff your AoE, or you have to use your move to get in range of Hexfield, and then when you do get in range of Hexfield, it does no damage, and it was like, holy crap. So I buffed Hexfield's damage by 25%. The damage on it feels nice now for an AoE. Keep in mind that AoEs in Midnight Suns are typically weaker than, say, chains or single targets. Why? Well, because they're point and click AoEs. Now, Hexfield is not necessarily point and click, but I see what they were going for. And so Hexfield, in essence, is used exactly the same way. I just gave it some love so it doesn't feel dreadful. And like when I use Hexfield, I'm like, oh man, I'm just applying weak in an AoE. It's like, well, I want it to at least have a little bit of a punch, so I buffed it 25%. Unleashed is the big one. Now, if you're in the boat of, oh, Zedd, it doesn't matter how much extra size you give Unleashed, it's still a shit card play. You're just buffing my AoE size. Okay, I concede that you might be right. But I also want you to consider that in the base game, Unleash Plus isn't even 50% increase. Like, if you compare the sizes of the AoEs with Unleashed Plus and without Unleashed Plus, it's 40%, but like, it's not that ridiculous. I'm almost doubling the effectiveness of Unleashed Plus in this mod, plus the fact you can get it free, plus the fact it can roll like Gain Conceal on redraw, which is an amazing mod, right? I hope that if you are like, just, no, Unleashed is shit, it doesn't do enough, because I was that way. This is the version of Unleashed that I, as someone who has that mindset, would be happy to use, right? I would be willing to consider it. Why? Well, Detonate now is the whole board, not even close. Like it's not even a discussion. It is the whole map if you're a Detonate user. Now remember, we just buffed Deadly Ground, right? So I am also factoring other character buffs and nerfs to some of these changes. I know I haven't really touched on those yet, but this is an example that comes up in this conversation. So Detonate now is amazing. Hex Field is freaking huge. So if you get like apply weak, apply bleed, it's gonna be like whoa, massive, right? Leading into that more debuff playstyle. Chaos Reigns is massive, and for 3 heroism cost, oh my god, the enemies are just gonna be like freaking having an all-out war, and you're just on the sideline eating popcorn. Like 70% on Unleash Plus is ridiculous. It's insane. So try it. Use Chaos Field, Chaos Reigns, and of course Hex Field. Let me know what you think. It's so ridiculous. No More as well. I didn't touch it, but I am keeping an eye on No More because it does suck to kill her. So I'll probably like. This was something that I kind of wish I did on this patch, but I'll talk to Louise about it. I want it to not kill her. I want it to just consume like 95% of her health, akin to Rain of Blows. That way, frankly, I just don't want you to lose a star for it, you know? Like that's kind of the dumb part about No More, is that why does his death affect my star rating? And I've always hated that, so I'd like to maybe get rid of that. Now, if that's the only change and the only issue I have with No More, I'll make it 99%. But that's a different conversation for a later patch. So these changes, I'm buffing 3 of her common cards, and that was the other idea too. If you've ever played Scarlet Witch recently and you've tried her common deck, oh my god. She has an like the worst base deck in the game, and if you are speedrunning, you will know that once you unlock Scarlet Witch, it's wise to never use her until the Witch on Wundagore Mountain. And when you get to Witch on Wundagore Mountain, even with a fully upgraded deck, because all her cards upgrade for free on that mission, in case you didn't know, it still feels like shit. So in that sense, for speedrunners, right, I do that a lot, or for people who just unlock Scarlet Witch on a new playthrough and you're like, I'll wait till endgame. Witch on Wundagore Mountain, this is going to make her feel way, way, way better. So yeah, have fun. She's the AoE queen now properly the way it should have been. And no, I'm not adding moves because I really want you to keep in mind that it's not just buffing Scarlet Witch if we give her more moves. It's buffing her whole team. That's the key, okay? That's why I didn't go that direction. Now, if we do need to take it that direction, sure. But right now, I don't think we do. 3 more to go. Spider-Man. So Spider-Man is a very fun character. He's quite unique, right? He has that environmental focus. He has some weird utility. He's very weird and quirky, and I quite like the character's design. But unfortunately, when you try to ever use him as a DPS, he's an absolute joke, right? I think you're crazy if you play him as a DPS pretty much outside of Act 1. So some of his cards feel really bad. Now, I only touched on 2 of them here. There's a reason for that. So, because he's so expensive in heroism until you play Spider Sense, which gives you fast. Now, normally fast sucks, but Spider-Man is one of few characters where fast is pretty solid. He also can get a ton of free mods on his cards, which then makes him quite useful, especially in endgame. There's some players who use him a fair bit on certain mission types, like Capture the Agent. Spider-Man is insane. Destroy Device, he's insane. Things like that. So he's great at finishing missions really, 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 really quick. And if you're an opportunist fan, I am not, but if you're an opportunist fan, if you draw it in the first turn, he feels great. All that said, the problem with Spider-Man is if you don't draw opportunist on turn 1, it feels awful. If you try to build a deck and run 4 of his attack cards, it feels pretty awful. And he's very much, at least for me, he feels very reliant on cards like Up Here, Infernal Spider, Thwip, Spider Sense, of course, right? And what's ironic is that he's the only character with just a point click, no questions asked, gain 1 strengthened via Web Slinger, and yet experienced players don't even use that card. Why? Because Web Slinger giving strengthen on Spider-Man is worthless. Why? Well, quick kick is a quick card, so strengthen doesn't really mean much there. Plus, its effect is quite good anyway. Strengthen also would only buff the base damage coefficient, of which there is not one on quick kick. Special Delivery is a pretty solid card as it is. Yes, it benefits from Strengthen, but not as much as you might desire. Chain Strike is just a horrible card at base. Yes, of course it benefits from Strengthen, but the card is still so hard to use anyway. And so, like, up here, like, let's be honest. Up here is the only card that feels great in terms of DPS on Spider-Man. And you would only really want to run Webslinger for up here. But I don't like that. And so I'm hoping now Spider-Man, he's on the watch list. He may need more love because I don't want him to just be a utility bot. I think that playstyle is fine. I think it works pretty well, right? If you build him like opportunist plus utility, he feels okay, right? But I do want to bring his damage up a peg. I want him to be like, okay, I'm a big Spider-Man fan. Like he's one of those popular superheroes in the world, if not the most popular Marvel superhero on the planet. And yet he feels like ass when you're trying to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And so I do want to bring him up a peg. I want to make DPS Spider-Man a real consideration, right? I don't want you to feel like you always have to run Thwip. I don't want you to feel like you always have to run Opportunist or Spider Sense, right? I want to introduce this idea of like 4 tech cards, 2 Web Slinger, 2 Up Here's, and Infernal Spider. Like that kind of deck is where I want him to go. He's just not there yet. So that was quite a bit of words. And so we're getting there. Now, the first step is I'm buffing Chain Strike by 25%. Why only 25%? Because remember, I've said it before, I'll say it again. When you're factoring in Strengthened, you do have to think about how much are you really upping these modifiers because it starts to become exponential, right? Multiplicative. So 25% on Chain Strike, it still may not be enough. It probably isn't enough, admittedly, but let's start there, okay? But the bigger change, and this one's going to really shake up both ways you can play Spider-Man, and that is Web Throw. Why is this going to shake up how he works? Well, Web Throw, if you factor out the damage and factor out base or resources, and you look at the base design, it's a point and click, forceful knockback, any direction, and it's an AoE around him. It's like it's so much, it's so good. Like Web Throw is an incredible card. Why does nobody run it? Well, because it's way too expensive and it does 0 damage even with strengthened. So how do you address both those issues? Simple. You reduce the heroism cost by 1, and remember, because you're usually running Spider Sense on Spider-Man, it's going to be 1. Web Throw is going to cost you 1 heroism on many turns now. And I'm giving you 25%, so now it's the same as Soul Blast, but in a big, like, AoE, not the same damage, but AoE damage, and then point and click in any direction. So it's like it's a 1 heroism cost lash essentially. Like now we're talking, right? Like now we're getting somewhere. Now I'll admit, and someone argued this with me, not argued, but they said that Special Delivery was fine. I do think Special Delivery is a fun card. But if Web Throw becomes a staple in Spider-Man's deck, which I think it will, Special Delivery may get axed for it. Because for that 1 heroism differential, or 2, I guess, if you think about that, Special Delivery gives you net 1, net plus 1. If Web Throw is being taken over Special Delivery because it's any direction, I may have to look at Special Delivery again. That's why I kind of mentioned Special Delivery in my watch list. Again, we'll get to it. But for now, the Chain Strike is just a touch because it needs something. And I'm being a little hesitant with Chain Strike, but I'm probably going to buff it again. And these Web Throw changes, I've been wanting these since literally launch. So this version of Web Throw feels awesome. Try it. Tell me what you think. Now, admittedly, buffing Web Throw does mean he's actually going to have some heroic card congestion, and this is something you have to consider. Like, if you're reading this and you're like, oh my god, Web Throw is broken now, Zedd, what the fuck? It's like, well, hold on. Because now you have to think about Thwip, Infernal Spider, Web Throw, and up here. Like, oh, well, shoot, that's already 4 cards. Right? So, now you're going to have to make a little bit of a decision on Spider-Man Heroics if you want to run all of them. And so yeah, I want people to feel engaged and feel like they have to choose, and that's always a good feeling. So Wolverine. Honestly, Wolverine's in a pretty good spot. Like, he's a character a lot of people think is really bad. I used to be there too. I didn't really understand how Midnight Special worked when the game came out. I don't think a lot of players did. But what we quickly learned was that Lethal Pounce into Midnight Special is ridiculous. Now, I want to preface this by saying Wolverine is a way better DPS than he is a tank. If you haven't figured that out by now, well, there you go. He is. And the reason why is he doesn't have any block generation, he doesn't have any resist generation. Yes, he does have good debuffs, and that's how I like to play the character. That's just a preference. I'm not going to tell you that's the best way to play him. It's just what I do. But lifesteal and healing based tanking is not that great, and his passive frankly kind of sucks. It will also be looked at in the next, or in the passive patch. Whether that's the next patch or not, I don't know yet. But his passive is going to get hit a little bit, and so we are looking at that. What I wanted to do with Wolverine was to bring his tanking up a little bit. This is something that, like, remember how I've been saying I'm trying to push every character into 2 builds and 2 playstyles, right? Like Ghost Rider, instead of being just Hell Ride all day, Penance, Stare the Boss, I want him to look into the Immolate Judgment builds. I want Blade to look into the debuff route. I want to push Spider-Man into a DPS route. I want like, I hope you guys are getting that picture where I'm trying to give every character 2 viable playstyles, because right now most of the cast is just 1, with maybe a card or 2 difference, and that's just not good, right? Especially when you only have 10 cards to choose from, it's like, okay, come on, like, seriously? So this is my first step to give Wolverine a little bit of love on some of his worst cards, and I will be tweaking some of these a bit further down the road, but let's discuss. So Piercing Slash, this card frankly just blows. This is not enough to make you consider the card. This is just the first step for those who do use the card. And again, we do have to consider Strengthened. We do have to consider how it works. That being Lethal Pounce, right? So Piercing Slash, again, 25%. It's a big number at 1 heroism. I am probably going to give this the Savage treatment and give it Vulnerable, but that's TBD. I'm going to watch this card and think about it a little bit more, but for sure, 125 works for me. Not much to say. Berserk base and upgrade. I did the same change. So if you read in the base game right now, base Berserk only lasts until the end of that turn, and Berserk Plus ends on the end of the following turn. We changed that entirely to just be 2 turns flat. So now the only difference between Berserk Base and Berserk Plus is the ability to mod it, obviously, and Berserk Plus draws 1 additional Wolverine card. Now, why did I do this? Well, because like Berserk was fine. You would always run Berserk, right? At least at 1 copy. Well, yeah. Here's my issue with Berserk. You only ran it because you kind of had to. If you ran Stink of Fear at 1 copy, sure, but how are you going to sustain yourself? It's not going to be your passive. And if you run Stink of Fear at 2 copies, you're going to be redrawing the second one all the time. So you kind of always ran Berserk not only to heal and tank what you could, but also to draw into Midnight Special and Lethal Pounce, because that's what you were doing. You'd play Berserk, play Lethal Pounce, play Midnight Special, win the game, right? Like that's, or something in that realm of design. So instead, I want you to think about like, okay, you can still use Berserk that way and not be missing out on anything. However, if you are running Berserk and you want to use Berserk as sort of the tanking healing or the healing option, I don't want you to play it and be like, you know, and then all of a sudden you have to just heal or miss out. It's like, no. What I want to do is I want you to play Berserk and then draw cards, play those cards, and still get the tanking factor, right? The next turn and the next turn. So that maybe instead of running 2 Berserks, if you were, maybe now you cut it to 1. Or maybe if you were running 1, you try 2 and you try a tank Wolverine build. Like that's I just want Berserk to last a bit longer. I want it to be more of like a state rather than a just a one and done situation. Now I know that kind of doesn't work in tandem with what Berserk means, like a burst of rage, a burst of like I need to do this now, like it's my final card, like I get thematically it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but base Berserk's healing lifesteal status effect in the base game just feels dreadful. So we're upping it to 2 turns. I hope you enjoy this. It's I thought it felt great. I thought it made me consider Wolverine tanking a little bit more, at least with the likes of Chain Swipes and Eviscerate. So, yeah. Now, Rapid Healing, I'll admit, this card just kind of blows, and so it's going to be hard to make this card good without completely rehauling how it works, but I think we can do it. I think I can get it to a point where someone would consider it. I've seen a lot of Wolverine builds on Reddit that actually run this card at one. Can you believe it? Some even run it at 2 copies. I know. That's like, you're actually trolling. But whatever. So, Rapid Healing base, the buff is it now heals the same as the upgrade. And to make up for that, the upgrade now gives you 1 free resist. Now, how does this work out in my head? Well, Rapid Healing, you could consider running over Berserk. Technically. But no one ever did. Why? Because the Rapid Healing is reactive healing, not proactive healing, like Berserk. And that's why, like, now giving Berserk 2 turns and Rapid Healing resist, it's like, okay, Berserk is proactive healing, whereas Rapid Healing is reactive plus the resist. Now, Wolverine does not have access to resist innately in his kit, nor does he have access to block. So by giving him this 1 touch of 1 resist, you can maybe start using this in conjunction with Stink of Fear. Now, I'll be honest with you. Call me crazy. I was even considering giving it 2 resist. I know. Because my logic is this, right? If he gets dazed or he gets stunned or you know, he's dead and you have rapid regeneration and your hand is res, right? I want you to, like, have rapid healing and be like, oh man, my Wolverine is dazed for 4 turns because Crossbones things. Very fun, interactive character. You know, rapid healing, boom. You know, heal all that health back. It's 75% health. Like, that's insane. That's an insane heal. And now I have this resist. Let's go to town. Eviscerate. Taunt, 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 taunt. Killed you. You're going to hit me. I'm going to resist it. Crossbones is targeting me now. And, you know, like, you should be able to dance around the battlefield as Wolverine. And right now you can't do that. You just die. Right? So I'm hoping that rapid healing pushes him in that direction. I am compelled to maybe up it to gain 2 resist, but I just want to see if people maybe start running rapid healing, or at least considering it. And again, I am trying to factor in the entire player base, and rapid healing is one of those cards that a lot of players do use, that casual players use, and if you're watching this video, you're already probably not a casual player, so I'm not flaming anybody. I'm not flaming you or people who aren't watching this video. I'm just saying the reality, and the reality is rapid healing gets used a lot. So I don't want to overtune it for someone who does use it a lot and looks at my mod and goes, you know, oh, hey, this looks cool. I want to try this. I don't want to buff the ever-living crap out of it because, well, I guess I don't really know why. But anyway, rapid healing. This is a card that's going to get incremental changes, like Chain Strike. I think I can get the cards to a point where they feel great without reworking them, like Vapors of Valtor, because Vapors of Valtor was actually game-breaking, whereas Rapid Healing and Chain Strike are at least usable. They're not completely dead. So, yeah. Alright, and the last character to talk about before we briefly go through my watch list, which is basically like upcoming things that I'm keeping an eye on, is Deadpool, obviously. So Deadpool is a dreadful character. He's one of the worst in the game. And if you disagree with that, I think you're kind of looking at him with rose-tinted glasses, or you're fanboying over Deadpool, one or the other, maybe both. His Enfuego is awful. His base cards are awful. They kind of rely on Enfuego to even be remotely decent. But even then, Enfuego damage only affects 2 or 3 of his cards, which is just ridiculous to me. The best thing about Deadpool is one of 3 things. And I say the best thing, one of 3, because you can't really do all 3. That being his debuff spread with the likes of Quick Shot and Spread the Love and Pain Pinata. His card draw and Heroism Generation, right? So it's support. Or his single target damage. The problem is, if you lean into any one of these 3, none of them are good enough to justify taking the character. Okay, so what if you try to do 2 of them? Or all 3 of them? Again, the character is not strong enough to do any of them. So, Deadpool still may need more, but I'm addressing some of the key cards that at least I felt was problematic, cards that have come up. And there is still a bit more work that needs to be done. But let's go through it. First up, Boom Headshot, both base and upgrade gain 1 change, that being they've just gained 1 base heroism. What is this actually changing? Well, Boom Headshot does an absurd amount of single target damage. I believe it's 200% offense, so we did not need to buff the damage. The problem with Boom Headshot is in order for it to gain heroism, or generate good heroism, excuse me, you have to build in Fuego. And the only way that Boom Headshot becomes a better card play for heroism generation is with 3 in Fuego. I didn't like that prospect. And I also didn't like that Boom Headshot base was 0 heroism. I thought that was just dumb. I get what they're doing, like, oh, it should cost 0 compared to other attack cards, but I just fundamentally disagree. So I gave Boom Headshot base heroism. And again, let me just change this to the correct terminology, technically. And so now it's more in line with regular attacks. If you're like, I want to run this single target damage, tons of heroism, do it. Right now at Fuego 2, it's giving 3 heroism. At Fuego 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in Fuego, if you're max in Fuego, this thing is giving you 6 heroism. That is absurd. Okay, so this card now is worth considering, whereas it wasn't really before. Even though it did great damage, it was just like, that's all it does. So I know it's only 1 heroism generated, but it does fundamentally change how the card functions. So yeah. Death from Above, nobody runs this card. It doesn't do enough damage, and that's the only thing it does. I feel like there's really not much to say here. I increased the base damage on both versions, and then I increased the Fuego damage modifier by 5% on base and 7% on the upgrade. That may not seem significant, but again, keep in mind strengthened, as we've said many times, but also how Fuego like continuously goes up 5 times. So now, if you think about it, Death from Above Plus is going to eventually do 200% more damage. Or rather, it's going to have a 200% damage modifier, and unupgraded, it's going to have a 150% damage modifier. So 150, 200, there's a 50% difference there at 5 in Fuego. Yeah. So incrementally, it was a bigger nerf than it may seem, or excuse me, it was a bigger buff than it may seem. But Death from Above, I mean, the character has, what, 5 attack cards? So you still may not run it, I'll admit. Like, you still may not like it, but if you're taking Deadpool in that single target direction, this card and Boom Headshot are gonna now feel great. You're gonna want to consider running these cards. Spread the Love. This card, I'll admit, still probably needs more work. But this card is great for spreading out debuffs, right? If you're an Fuego stacker, then you're going to be able to spread so much debuff or do a ton of damage, right? And so I wanted to give it quite a beefy and significant damage buff. I want someone to use it for damage. I want someone to use the card at all. Nobody uses Spread the Love. So this card probably needs more attention, but this is just my first step. 50% is just a joke for what the card's base design is. So we're making it 75. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. So it still may get more buffs in the future, but let me know. I was okay with it, but again, because he has 5 attack cards with the changes to Boom Headshot, I didn't personally run Spread the Love, but I didn't want to overbuff it just because I didn't use it. So this is one of those changes where it's like, here you go, tell me what you think. Oh, you still hate the card? Okay, we're going to buff it again, right? Not much to say there. The card might still suck. I don't know. Pain Pinata, I've actually had mixed feedback on this one. Some people think it's in a great spot now. I think it's in a great spot now. Some people have said it still doesn't do enough, but what I want you to consider about Pain Pinata is 2 things. Number 1, it's meant for Fuego generation. Through and through. Like, that's what it's for, and debuffing. But, like, Fuego generation is solely what it's for. That's why the damage modifier was so low at 50%. And the effect does not, or the Fuego effect does not increase its damage, it simply increases its size. So, remember, we are addressing passives in a future patch. So when that happens, Pain Pinata is going to start to get, you know, pretty impactful, pretty significant. So Pain Pinata for 1 heroism when you upgrade it, and you get a debuff mod on it, hopefully. Plus the Fuego stacking. And I've doubled the damage that Pain Pinata does. Yes, it's not going to be nuking kids, but it is going to feel really good after the passive patch. If it doesn't, I'll come back to it. But in its current state, I still think it feels pretty good, but I'm a bit biased because I know where the next patch is going to go already. So I'm a bit biased. Pain Pinata will feel good. If not, if you don't think it's good this patch, it will be good once we redo the passives. So keep that in mind. But I doubled the damage, so it's actually worth playing now. And it's easier to generate Infuego stacks to get kills. Or, sorry, it's easier to do damage to get Infuego stacks. There we go. Okay, and that's it for the roster. I know this is a long one. There will be timestamps. If you've made it this far and you've watched the whole thing, I applaud you, and I apologize, but these things take time. So, the watch list. Now, there are things I'm going to add to it. This is something I'm going to use as my own reference. This I'll just be sort of intermittently changing, but as of right now, at the time of this video, strictly based on this patch, this is what I'm looking at, and I'm going to give a little bit of insight. So, as I touched on, Regroup and Supernova may need some buffs depending how Captain Marvel plays out. So what that means is I'm curious to see if Regroup is even used. Some people might use it, some people may not. If it's not, then I'll add something to it. Supernova, because of the change to binary as a state, giving that base 25%, plus her having access to another resist now via Cosmic Ray, I just was a little hesitant because... And with legendary cards being available to Epic, you can roll Supernova to get that sweet mod that you want. So I was just hesitant, right? So yeah, Supernova probably needs a touch, but I didn't want to do it quite yet. Okay. Spider-Man, he might need some more changes to Chain Strike, right? That card is something else. And special delivery, like I touched on, if web throw starts to get too strong and too used, special delivery might become useless. That's just something I'm keeping an eye on. If that doesn't end up being the case, then great. I think special delivery is a pretty solid card. Iron Man, I'm just adding this disclaimer. He's difficult to balance because his base design is so good. And without ruining the design and ruining that whole like one trick wonder and like I am the team kind of mentality, it's hard to balance him without making him too strong or too weak. But I think that the hits to the one turn kills is enough, right? He still has that clunkiness, he still has the brickiness. He still requires you to use your redraws only on him, so you can't redraw really anything else in your hand. So I think he should still be single-handedly the best carry in the game outside of maybe Hunter, and that's fine, right? Now I will say this, is New Plan is a pretty bad card. I completely want to redo how it's designed. I just haven't decided what that is yet, but I'm completely axing its function, similar to how we did with Vapors of Eltor. New Plan just needs a completely new design. I'm working on it. It's not going to be doubling your heroism. It's going to be something else entirely. So Iron Man players, Iron Man fans, look forward to that. I know it's still his worst card by a mile. It's not even close. So, yeah. Deadpool, I just touched on this a little bit. He might need more, but because he's new and people are still exploring him a little bit, myself included, I just want to kind of incrementally give him buffs, although his base cards are just so bad. Like, so bad that I don't know what they were thinking. Like, they went way too low on his coefficients, so I just decided to turn up the dial a little bit. Instead of being, set at 3, I decided to turn it up to 6, right? So we'll see. We'll see. Hunter, this one is a big one. So Hunter is very, very good. I buffed, the worst cards that Hunter has. There are a few more, but, as long as each card has a reason to be used, I'm happy. But I will admit, Hunter needs nerfs, straight up. Like, the character is way too good. They solo missions way too easily. And I think two of the biggest culprits of this are Last Sight and Annihilation. Now, you guys may know, I don't really use Annihilation a whole lot. I use Bladestorm majority of the time. But I do recognize Annihilation is so ridiculous. And Last Sight, come on. I mean, come on. Come on. The fact that Last Sight can roll knockback quick, like, Last Sight is ridiculous. This card is broken. It's maybe even better than Vapors of Valtor, honestly, because of its mods and how much damage it does. But either the conceal is gone or I'm gutting the damage. There really is no in between. There's no world where it keeps both its conceal and its damage. So I just need to decide which one is more appropriate and which one makes more sense. I'm leaning towards just axing the conceal entirely, given that Hunter already has many other cards that she or they could tank with, right? You have the likes of Guarding Strike, which needs a little bit of love, I'll admit. You have Fortify, you have Heal. Excuse me. So, Hunter will get nerfs, and Last Sight and Annihilation are on the list, but not yet. And last up, Daywalker. So I touched on this a little bit. Daywalker might need a small buff with strikes buffs. We shall see. The reason why I didn't buff it in this patch is because I don't think that strikes damage is comparable to Daywalker. Daywalker does do a fair bit more damage, but you know, even, and I'm just spitballing here. Nothing I'm about to say in this sentence is set in stone. Daywalker might even get like a small heroism nerf down from 3. It might get an additional passive. I might even give it like a full combo, right? I'm not sure. But Daywalker might get a touch up. So, long video. If you watched the whole thing, again, I applaud you. And if you just jumped around and you watched the watch list, that's fine. That was a lot for me too. But anyway, this is the patch that Luis and I have given to you guys. We are planning to do a lot more of these. Like I said, we're following through with the whole season's pass. We're going to do passives eventually. I'm going to continuously change the cards as we make other changes. We're going to look at difficulties eventually. We're going to look at reinforcements eventually. There's so much coming down the pipeline, and I can't wait to share all that with you guys. It's going to be great. The end game goal is to be able to play like, you know, like Zedd and Louise's version of Midnight Suns and have it just feel like a better game. Like I want it to just be more fun. I want more builds to be viable. I want all the cards to be good. I want the game to still remain difficult for some players or for those who think it's too easy, like me. I want us to be able to make that Ultimate 4, Ultimate 5, or whatever in a way where it's like, oh crap, like this is okay, I actually have to use combat items now? Are you serious? Stuff like that. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope this was insightful. Let me know in the comments if you have read the patch or you've tried the patch. Let me know what your thoughts are, right? You know, as always, well thought out issues and solutions are way better than just raw complaints, because I don't know what you're trying to say. If you're just like, you gutted Vapors of Valtor, you nerd. It's like, well, why is that an issue for you, right? So let's talk about it. But anywho, I'll catch you on the next one. Have fun. I really hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you look forward to the next version of it. And I will see you on the next one. Bye for now.